Washington Journal continues.
And we're joined at our table once again by Colonel Cedric Leighton to talk about the ongoing fight against ISIS in Iraq and Syria. And Colonel Leighton, one of the major stories on that front this week has been the effort by the Iraqi military and their allies to retake major cities in Iraq. Can you talk about how that's going as we showed this headline from the front pages of today's New York Times? Battered but unbowed, ISIS is still on the offensive.
Absolutely. And John, good morning. There are so many different pieces to a military movement of this particular type. So what we're looking at here, on the one hand, you have a lot of pronouncements by people in the Pentagon, people in the administration saying that they've captured on the order of, or recaptured on the order of 25% of the territory that ISIS has taken in Iraq itself. But then you have headlines like this, which basically say, hey, these guys are still moving forward. So what is the truth? Well, the basic idea is that this is a very fluid situation. So the answer is that actually both are correct, but some things are more than others. When you're dealing with an organization like ISIS, yes, they want to be a state. They call themselves Islamic State. They want to have territory. They want to do all of the things that normal countries, normal nation states do. But there's a major difference in the fact that their military forces are extremely fluid. They're almost not quite independent of the land that they're on, but they can live off the land much better than conventional military forces could.
So according to Reuters, the battle in Tikrit, more than 20,000 Iraqi troops and Shiite militias supported by local Sunni tribesmen are taking part in this offensive. It began 12 days ago. The stories, the headlines that we've seen are some gains in Tikrit, although the entire city hasn't been taken back yet. Is this a matter of ISIS sort of picking its battlefield then?
Well, it's actually both sides are picking their battlefields, and so when they both pick the same one, that's when you actually have that conflict, and you actually have, the typical things that you would see in a battle with explosions and, bombs going off, rockets being fired, machine guns. All of those things. So these battles are basically designed to change the momentum in the war. And so ISIS chose the battles during their major offensive. When they went down the Tigris and the Euphrates River valleys, they were choosing the place and time of of each one of the things that they did, each one of the cities that they took, each one of the towns that they took. All of that was done on ISIS's timetable. But when you get into a situation like Tikrit, where the Iraqi forces, both militia and the regular governmental forces, are retaking the city, that then is obviously the Iraqis, with Iranian help, going in there and doing things on their timetable. So, of course, that ISIS has territory, such as Tikrit, they have to defend that territory, and they're put in a position that is not normal for a group that has advanced. They were, in essence, doing, what I guess could loosely be, made to look somewhat like the Blitzkrieg, where they moved rapidly, lived off the land, did things very, very quickly, outmaneuvered all of the Iraqi forces who absolutely were not ready for them, during this offensive period. But when they came in, they had to not only take territory, they had to maintain their hold on the territory.
You're a frequent guest on this program, but I want to remind viewers of your credentials. Former Deputy Director for Training at the NSA, a former member of the Joint Staff at the Pentagon under Admiral Mullen, led an intelligence team deployed to Saudi Arabia in support of the shock and awe phase of Operation Iraqi Freedom, and a retired colonel in the Air Force, joining us to talk about the ongoing battle against ISIS in Iraq and Syria. So are you saying, do you expect the battle for Mosul to be different than what we've seen in the past 12 days in Tikrit and the areas leading to Tikrit?
To some extent, yes, because Mosul is a far larger city. You've got so many, it's basically Iraq's second largest city. Well over 1 million people lived there. It's hard to say now exactly how many are still resident in Mosul. Tikrit is a much smaller place. But given all of that, there are so many different aspects of the way in which these campaigns are waged, that one thing that may be very similar, and it's going to be interesting to see if this actually happens in this way, but one of the key elements of warfare in the Middle East is that at some point, one or the other forces is going to melt away. So if the force that is being defeated or perceives that it is going to lose a particular, like a battle for a city or for any town or village, any other urbanized area, what they'll do is they'll melt away into the population. And I've already seen.
And this is a historic trend in warfare in that region of the world.
Exactly. You can go all the way back, centuries for this kind of behavior, if you will, military behavior on their part. And what they end up doing is they end up preserving themselves to fight another day. It's actually a very wise strategy, and it's something that I think we misread as we went into Iraq in the Iraqi freedom phase in 2003, and throughout the period that we were in Iraq. I think we misread the tendency of many forces in the Middle East to basically at a certain point say, okay, this battle is not working for us. We're going to choose unconventional methods. So in order to get to an unconventional phase or a more unconventional phase, we will melt into the population and disperse. And you see examples of that, not only, in the Mohammedan times, back in the 6th, 7th century AD, but also in more recent times, in the period right after, or during and right after World War I, you see a lot of Arab armies doing that. And so the term army is basically, in that particular time period, was an agglomeration of all these different tribes. And this is a continuation of that. So what I'm seeing in today's battle is the possibility of ISIS fighters melting into the population, ditching their weapons, any type of identifying uniforms or anything like that, looking as if they're everyday residents of the area, and getting out of Dodge to fight another day.
So much has been made about the U.S. air campaign that's been going on for months and months against ISIS in Iraq and Syria. What gets lost when the allies that are the actual boots on the ground go into a city like Mosul? Do they lose much of that U.S. air support that can be brought on a larger battlefield outside of a city?
It's easier, from an air campaign perspective, it's easier to fight in an open battle, in an open air type campaign, non-urbanized area, open fields, like the huge tank battles in World War II. That's a prime area for air power to be very, very effective. But that doesn't mean that you cannot use air power in an urban environment. It's just much more difficult and requires much more precise targeting. In the old days, what would happen is, and I'm talking, Vietnam and pre-Vietnam, World War II, you basically were much more indiscriminate in the way in which you attacked targets. You didn't have as much concern, or the technology, to actually handle precision strikes. Every now and then you got lucky and you had a precision strike, but it wasn't the fact that you didn't have precision-guided munitions like you do today. So if you have the right geographic coordinates, you can actually hit the things that you want to hit. Now, sometimes, of course, you hit the things you want to hit, and it still may be the wrong target because the people that you want to get at, or the organization that you want to destroy, has moved or has, in other ways, been rendered militarily ineffective. So there are a lot of considerations. It is very difficult to do, but it requires absolutely precise intelligence to do it in an urban environment. It can be done, but it is one of those areas that you have to work very carefully with the local forces.
So does that mean American spotters on the ground going into the city behind the Iraqi troops? How much U.S. involvement does that mean on the ground?
From a technical perspective, it becomes much easier if you use American spotters or forward air controllers, as they're called, in an area like that. So forward air controllers are well trained. They have the technical capabilities. They have the gear that can talk directly to the aircraft, and also what's known as the Air Operations Center. So the Air Operations Center is the thing that, the entity that controls the whole air piece, the whole air picture, and it also tells the individual pilots basically where to go through. Of course, there's a huge command and control structure, but just to simplify it a bit, so the basic idea is you use that structure and you can work very effectively within that structure.